Welcome, everybody. My name is David Giesecke. I'm with the CONVERGED User Group, and we've got a great conversation today. I'm joined with the president of the CONVERGED User Group, Jonathan Toulon, aka JT, from Mohawk Industries, the vice president of the CONVERGED User Group, Matt Wakefield, aka Matt Wakefield, from Oshkosh Corporation, and Nigel Moulton, our international representative over in the UK. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us, and we're going to talk about assessing infrastructure needs. So JT, kick us off. Tell us a little bit about Mohawk and tell us about what you're doing now, and then Matt, follow up, and let's get this conversation started.
Sure. Mohawk is the global conglomerate for flooring. So that could be hardwood, carpet, laminate, you name it. We probably have it. We also are in the countertop business as well. We produce quartz countertops as well. I am the senior director of global infrastructure and cybersecurity. So that's anything core services, core infrastructure, networking, network security, and lovely cybersecurity.
And I'm Matt Wakefield. I'm with Oshkosh Corporation. I'm the director of platform services, and in that space, I own our data center practices, compute, storage, and data protection. Oshkosh is a global industrial. We are the leader in specialty trucks, military vehicles, and access equipment, and we operate all around the world.
Fantastic. And Nigel, you're a longtime user group member and friend of the user group. Tell us about your CI and HCI history and what's going on in the UK.
Yeah, so formerly I was the Dell CTO here in Europe, responsible for the converged, hyper-converged business. And my sort of interaction with the company goes back to the acquisition of VCE. And VCE, as many of you will remember, was a highly disruptive play with converged infrastructure, where the idea was to sort of pre-package a set of infrastructure solutions to help you build out private clouds more quickly than you could do if you were engineering these systems yourselves. And then as hyperconvergence, I think, has now become probably the mainstream technology. In my role at Dell, I was very much front and center in conversations with people like JT and Matt globally, actually, around what is the right technology choice, where do we think this is headed, and how do you blend your sort of on-premise private cloud solutions, which are being built using these technologies, with the relationships you probably already have with the hyperscalers. So that's my background in all of this.
Fantastic. And gentlemen, thanks for joining us. JT, what projects you have going on right now? How are you assessing your infrastructure needs? Share a little bit.
I mean, what projects don't I have going on? I mean, global networking, global cybersecurity. But our big focus right now is the edge. I know everybody says that you're trying to get out of the data center business, but the evolution of the data center has changed. So although you might not have your traditional data center, compute, network, backup, storage, all of that will still exist somewhere, specifically when we're talking about the edge, right? So our focus is how do we continue to perform at a certain level, not lose that level of credibility with our business partners, but also the ability to just run our business.
Yeah, and we're in a similar place. The edge is a big focus for us. We're seeing the rapid digitalization of a lot of traditional manufacturing processes, whether it's robots or autonomous operations on the shop floor. All of those capabilities are definitely driving a lot of development at the edge data center for us, as opposed to a few years ago when most of the focus was in our consolidated core data centers or in the cloud. Edge is a big topic for us too.
Yeah, and I think we're going to get into this because we'll talk about this a little bit later on, I think, but the edge technology is now replicable from the core, right? The stuff that you're deploying in the core is by and large the same. It has the same sort of behavioral characteristics, operational characteristics as that you're deploying at the edge. And so I think that actually does help when you assess the infrastructure needs, the extent to which you can replicate the thing that your core is built on and actually push that sort of similar capability out towards the edge as well. I think that'll be an important conversation for us.
Well, to piggyback on that then, gentlemen, let me open this up. What are some best practices or lessons learned for as you go about assessing the infrastructure needs that you can share with folks?
You can go, Mr. Wakefield.
Sure. I think, all of these kind of conversations start with an understanding of the big picture. They all start for us with collaboration with our internal customer, who in most cases is a business software owner or an application team. In lots of cases now, we're seeing that customer be many times a direct OT team in a factory, which is a little bit of a shift for us from the way things used to operate. So it starts with a collaboration, understanding workloads, understanding the nature of how those are going to evolve, and planning out an infrastructure that's going to meet those needs today, but also be able to grow and encompass all the projected needs in the future.
Yeah, and I can piggyback off of that. Absolutely collaboration. To your point, Matt, it's a bunch of lines of business, and now that IT has become such an enabler for OT has now become into the picture of being a huge business owner as we continuously evolve. And I think it comes from the top. What is the vision for the business? How are you going to take what the vision is and create a model that can support it? Can innovate around it. So that's kind of our focus. And I would say for me, best practice is definitely just having the conversation, talking to people. That's huge to truly understand what everybody's needs are.
And I think we've seen this elsewhere, right? That the focus, I think, historically around IT has been around reduction of operational cost. Right, so new systems are deployed with the essence that they're actually going to be sort of cheaper to operate and maintain than those they're replaced. And I think that is still by and large true. When you look at the edge, though, the complication, I think, is that you don't necessarily always have the skill set there. So I think another thing to factor in, and again, I think we might get into this in some more detail shortly, is the extent to which you can automate the functions of patching, maintaining, all the different things that are laborious and error prone. It's sometimes difficult to do in the core data center, let alone in a remote location that might be hours away in time zone. So we'll talk a bit more about this later on, but I think automation is another key topic here. When you look at assessing the infrastructure that you have, the extent to which the automation tools exist and are easily deployable within your current setup, let's say.
We don't need to wait on that conversation. We could get right into that now. How are you guys thinking about automation as you assess the infrastructure needs? And do you think about it differently when you're looking at your core planning versus your edge planning? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'll take that one first. So automation is obviously probably top 5 things we talk about. I think you can translate what you do in the core to the edge, right? I think a lot of companies have already started to attack this at the core, and they're going to just try to replicate it into the edge. To Nigel's point from earlier, you're basically taking the data center and you're creating a smaller subset of the same type of technology, and you're putting it at the edge, right? Because you want that same level of performance, and you want to have that ability to scale out. So for us, you want to get rid of the NVA, as we call it, the no value add work. You're going to pay your engineers to do a certain level of work, and you don't want it to be the mundane day-to-day operational type of task that consumed us for so many years, when you can have the technology overlaid on top of the hardware, right? Hardware is a commodity. The difference between the technologies is the software piece. And the easier it is for our organization to automate those mundane tasks, allows for more optimization and more outside the box thinking on how we innovate to continue to push our business forward.
Yeah, all the things we all spent years working on in the core, right? High availability, high performance, all the automation things. Our customers expect that same experience when they're deploying their workloads at the edge. So, those things just come along naturally. To JT's point, you really want to try to eliminate as much of that non-value added work, whether it's patching or just normal day-to-day operations. You want as much of that automated as possible.
I think the other thing that's interesting is that, Matt, you sort of touched on this, is that if you're automating parts of a warehouse or a manufacturing facility, for example, where you're having fleets of autonomous robots, these are real-time decisions that are made by the devices themselves connected to some sort of cloud capability. So I think outside of the conversation that we've been having about the edge and its importance, there's also a difference, I think, in real time, because real time at the edge of the network, it has a different concept, I think, to that you see in the core. Would you guys agree with that? And can you sort of give us some steers as to how that affects your thinking about the infrastructure that you do deploy there?
Yeah, definitely for us. One of the shifts has just been our posture in terms of availability, right? Edge sites, maybe for a lot of folks historically, it really wasn't as much of a focus on, is there a high availability? Are we able to support workloads with a very demanding, performance? And can we support workloads that literally, if that application isn't running, the entire factory goes down, right? I think those are some of the things that are evolved. We always dealt with that in the core data centers, but that's now come, for us to the edge. And when you're talking about some of the use cases, autonomy, high levels of integration of the equipment itself into control systems, it really forces you to think about that edge compute environment, as a absolutely critical part of your infrastructure in a way that a lot of folks probably didn't in years past.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the risk appetite. What is your intellectual property, right? Obviously, me coming from a financial services background now into manufacturing, IP is very different now. It is a plant per se, right? So to Matt's point, high availability is huge when you think about it. So that's why edge is so important with the same capabilities, because if you lose connectivity to your core data center, you don't want to lose the ability to make flooring. So that's why it's very important that when you design and you build it, you understand what the requirements are. And a requirement is the ability to function without data center connectivity.
So JT, it's a great point, and I'll take that segue from you. You mentioned you were in financial services and now you're in manufacturing. For folks who don't know, that transition happened during 2020, right? Or going into 2020 with this whole social distancing thing and the COVID pandemic. So you're new to the job, you're new to manufacturing this year, coming from long history of IT transformation. You've assessed your infrastructure needs, or you're in the process of doing that. What are some things that are key, top of mind for you that really you've jumped out at you in the past year or so? What can you share as lessons learned? And then Matt, as you're listening to this, please weigh in on thoughts that you've got as well. I really think that's what's great about the user group and how we can share best practices and lessons learned and have those discussions so that everybody can kind of learn faster and stand on the shoulders of giants, so to speak.
Yeah, you bring up a great point, Dave. I think a lot of times people just come in and they want to solve the problem, but the problem is you need to understand how you got here in the first place. So understanding current state, how did we get to current state? And then how do you align, right? When you're in a global organization, there's a lot of people that you have to talk to and you have to sell to, right? You need to make sure that whatever you're selling will fit the mold for everybody. It might not always. You might have to have one or two different options or maybe more depending. But the more you communicate, the more you realize that there's a lot of alignment when you do it, right? A lot of people, when you don't extend that hand or you don't communicate at that level, then people feel like you don't care and they'll go do their own thing. But in a global organization, you have to make sure that collaboration is strong, because the more buy-in you have, the easier it is to sell to your boss.
Yeah, I absolutely want to echo those words, right? Alignment, alignment with our customer, right? Which comes from collaborating and communication, right? That's the most important thing when you're assessing, what infrastructure is going to work for us, right? You have to understand, back to the beginning, you have to understand the big picture, right? You have to understand really get into your customer's head, understand what's important to them, understand why they may be choosing a particular application or software or operating model. The more you understand about your customer, the more that you can help guide them. And a lot of our teams are going to be pretty opinionated. They have their preferred technology, they have their preferred solutions. So, a lot of times our job is to help guide, our customers. Certainly, like I said, we tend to be opinionated in what we think works, but taking that expertise and helping our customers come up with an infrastructure solution that's going to serve that need. And one of the things I think we hope is that our teams have the experience, they've seen what works, and they can take that, and everybody you can at the end of the day come up with a solution that will serve the business as efficiently as possible.
Fantastic. Well, so far, I think my big takeaways are collaborate, cooperate, communicate. So 3 C's. Don't assume, DA, and align. So DAA, 3 C's and a DAA. That's kind of my takeaways right here. Nigel, what have you heard from this conversation thus far?
Sounds like my grades at school, so let's not go too much into that. No, I think there's a conversation that started at the edge, and I agree with everybody's comments so far. It's becoming the new center of attention because of the type and nature of the work that's done in edge locations, regardless really of which vertical you're in. The extent to which real time is different at the edge versus the way it is in central, more centralized deployments. And then thirdly, I think there's a commonality of technology, right? I'm in the UK. The conversations I have with customers here are very similar to the conversations we're having with you guys, which is we're looking at a technology choice around convergence or hyperconvergence or slight derivatives of that. The idea that we are going to be building standalone bespoke systems, that's not in vogue right now. We are trying to design around a set of best practice wherever possible and actually make that the thing that gets deployed. And what we're overlaying on top of that is a set of technologies, around containerization, for example, but also an automation layer and a management layer. And both Matt and JT have said this, which removes away the laborious, error-prone nature of some of the tasks that our IT guys have had to do, sort of IT guys and girls, actually, for that matter, have had to do historically. So for me, I think you're right. The edge is where it's at. Automation is key, and conversations with your line of business owners and your application owners to dovetail their requirements with the technology that you can bring to bear to serve that. I think that's where I'm at with this conversation. That'd be my takeaway from what I've heard over the past sort of 18 minutes.
Fantastic. Gentlemen, we are closing in on time. I appreciate this. This has been a fantastic conversation. We're now going to take some questions via chat. So stand by for that. We'll get adjusted, get ourselves all ready to go. Thank you again. This is part one or one part of a few in a series where we're going to queue in and pick the brains of our board members and try to get this out to the membership. We hope you'll enjoy it. We hope you enjoyed this, and we hope you'll join us as we go forward. And we look forward to seeing you soon. But right now, let's get those questions from the chat. Thanks. All right, fantastic. Thanks everybody for your time. We have the group chat. Please chat. We've got Q&A, and we'll just dive right in. Nigel, Matt, JT, we've got a question here in the chat. What insights can you share regarding initial infrastructure audits, either for an acquisition or for those who've changed jobs or roles and responsibilities recently? So what do you guys think there?
Don't all answer at once.
you want to jump in, JT? Put you on the spot.
Sure.
So look, I think I'll make a start on this. So because this is quite me actually, as part of the work I'm doing independently here in the UK, I have just taken on a role very, very similar to this. So we've walked into a situation where we are looking at a asset base which is 4 to 5 years old. So it's coming to the end of its operational life. And one of the first questions that the business is asking is whether they should just extend the warranty on it, because that's what they've kind of always done. So you look at the sort of age and the functionality of the equipment and you go, there's no way that you'd want to run a multi-million-pound business on technology that's technically at the end of its warrantable life. So I think there's an element of this as you step into it, which is audit around age, capability, and then the question that has come down from the finance group that I'm working with is, okay, we like making capital investments because CapEx is good. It's assets, we can manage them, we can amortize them. If we are making a move to the cloud, which is more OpEx oriented in how it gets spent, how does that shift the accounting posture of the firm, right? And that's a question that we have yet to debate with them. So for me, walking into something new, it was take a look at the age and the appropriateness of the infrastructure that you've inherited. That's a key part of the audit, I think. And then secondarily, as there is a shift to cloud and as there is a shift to sort of operational methods for paying for this, to what extent does your finance group need to sort of change its posture? And I know both Matt and JT talked about that during the initial conversation. So there's my sort of take as a first pass on that.
Great, Nigel. JT, Matt, you guys have any reactions to that?
No, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. Once you've completed that, and you make a decision to go forward with some new design, I mean, that's when you can really take a look at what your strategy is. If you've settled on a finance strategy and you've settled on you want to go forward, then you can take a look at, what's our strategy. Let's say we want to stay on premise with something. What's important to us. If you're in that state, you're going to start from scratch. You have the opportunity to look at lots of different technologies and figure out what best meets your operational needs and the requirements of your customer.
Yeah, I agree. I think requirements is a big part of it for sure. Then it allows you to figure out how you can do acquisitions as well. When you onboard a company, one of the big things you have to go through is assessing their environment to see what is the depreciation on the current environment. Is already fully depreciated. Do you want to continue to stay on that infrastructure for a certain period of time? Can you operationalize it with the team that you have? Or are you going to get people? I mean, it's a lot to think through. I think life cycle management also is a big part of it. To Nigel's point, making sure that you have a good rotation and refreshing of hardware, understanding that refreshes is the cost of doing business. And I think that is the message that needs to be given to your executive leadership so they understand that investment should come every 3 to 5 years, depending on your depreciation schedule.
So one other angle to this that was interesting, I was talking to a friend of ours who's recently taken a new job over the past probably 18 months. And he was talking about just simply finding out where all his infrastructure was. He's kind of, he's in the Middle East and he's got, different data centers everywhere. Have you guys run into a challenge of actually tracking down where the infrastructure you're responsible for is? And do you have any insights on that? I thought that was a really interesting and eye-opening conversation that I had.
Yeah, I've certainly run into that in the past. Especially if you're walking into something new, right? Sometimes there's, you actually get in a situation where you've got to go do, kind of old school physical inventory and actually figure out what you've got, because things may be on, off. You just don't know what you've got. But I mean, there certainly are tools that can go do that kind of discovery. That's probably for anything of any kind of size. I think you'd be looking at some kind of discovery tooling to go interrogate either the network or some of your control planes to try to figure out what you've got. Especially if you're walking into something with any amount of size, it's going to be difficult to try to do that manually.
Yep. Asset management or asset discovery is arguably the hardest thing to accomplish in any company. That's not just from an infrastructure side, that's also a cybersecurity side as well. So, yes, you will always have assets you'll never know about. Fortunate there are tools out there that are getting a lot better at discovering them over multiple, or I guess in different scenarios, whether that be IP, RFD. There's a lot of different ways that you can identify devices in an environment now. So it's giving people that empowerment to really see more, to be able to account for it as well as protect it.
Yeah, I think it's particularly important when, there's elements of the infrastructure that might be supporting operating systems, Server 2003, Server 2007, which, should have been banished 10 years ago, but still float around in organizations because somebody somewhere is still running an app that requires that sort of infrastructure to support it. And it might be sort of buried away in a virtual machine or in a server somewhere. So the audit capability to actually go and pull it out, to JT's point, that actually has quite a significant impact on governance and risk. So the extent to which you're managing the governance risk associated with out-of-date infrastructure and hardware, it becomes super, super important. I think there's a bunch of very, very good cybersecurity tools out there that actually can do some of that discovery for you and sort of help you build an audit log. And I think it's then beholden on you to sort of flag anything you find as high in the company as it needs to go, because these things do pose governance challenges sometimes, and there is a risk to the business that the business might not be aware of because of out-of-date, typically software that's sitting in a machine buried away somewhere. And I think there's still this belief that everybody kind of does this really well. Truth of the matter is that there's work to do for all of us in terms of improvement in terms of that asset management capability, and letting the software do the hard work, I think is a big part of the answer. And let's not forget that sometimes the intellectual property that you have is in your people. There might be people that know there are things tucked away somewhere that you might like to know about if you're new into a role, for example, right? So that discovery process can sometimes be a people-related topic, but I think these days it's an automation exercise, and that's how I would view it.
Great points. So many times we come back to the people and the processes and the leadership, and the importance there. We've got a few more minutes. Folks, again, if you've got a question, please feel free to send that in to the Q&A. And I've got one here, guys. Towards the end of the conversation, or in the conversation, we were talking about no value add work. And how do you identify and eliminate the no value add work, the mundane tasks? Is this something that over time you guys have developed a process on how to attack that, or is it ad hoc? What kind of insights can you share with assessing this infrastructure, and how identifying the no value add work helps you identify where you need to change your infrastructure?
Yeah, I'll go first because I'm already started.
Yeah,
one.
Geez, there you
go. Obviously, automation is always a big part of that conversation, right? Utilizing the technology to offload some of that mundane day-to-day type of work for engineers that you're paying a lot of money to actually get them to do more optimization, innovation within your platform. So, a prime example of some good automation obviously would be like a VCF type of platform, or if you're a Red Hat shop, possibly Ansible Tower or Ansible just by itself, if you have that expertise. But again, it's about making sure you understand what your people are capable of and you have that skill set. That is part of the big portion to be able to offload those mundane tasks, to allow a tool to do that for you. And if you don't have it, then it'll be very difficult for you to offload that type of work.
Yeah, I typically approach this two ways. I think most of our teams really probably know, are quite in tune with what they're doing, that they, that isn't adding a lot of value. And I think, first thing often to do is to survey the team and get direct response from engineers about, what they know, that, they probably are the best source of that anecdotal information. But the other side of that too, it really depends on your posture around, time collection, the allocation of, whether you're tracking time, reporting time. And I've also seen instances where, when you aggregate the time that's being spent on certain kinds of management tasks, it's a lot larger than what you might think it is, because it's spread around to lots of different people. So I personally kind of take a two-pronged approach, one qualitative and one quantitative. And, usually together that can help you figure out where your opportunities are.
And sometimes it's a function of how long it takes to process change, right? So somebody in the company comes to you and say they want a new server deploying. If the answer is weeks, there's something wrong, right? Because that points to a whole set of inefficiencies, probably in the way in which the request might be originally generated, certainly through to how it gets fulfilled, right? So I think there's a quick litmus test is, how long does it take to provision a thing? And industry best practice would say, look at maybe a cloud provider, or look at some more modern elements of your infrastructure to sort of help determine that length of time. And when you bring new technology in, for example, when you bring hyperconvergence into a data center for the first time, there's suddenly a bunch of things that engineers don't have to do anymore. And they're reasonably easy to categorize and list. And so in just one area, you can relatively quickly identify an associated FTE count and maybe even an FTE cost associated with some patching elements, for example, with things that automation does now that would normally have been research projects for people to make sure that drivers work with drivers inside the infrastructure, right? With newer technologies, those things tend to disappear. And sometimes the vendor can actually help you develop a business case around the sort of cost savings elements of that, based on tackling one area, in the case of hyperconvergence coming in place of perhaps traditional monolithic architectures. So the vendors can sometimes help you build a business case based on the experience they have and how these newer technologies can actually help sort of get rid of that no value add work. And, in future series, Dave, we're looking at, financial impact and financial assessments. This is part of the work we do as part of that. He says, giving us a little slight plug to a future one of these series that we've been working on. But sometimes get the vendor to help. Right? They're not always the bad guys trying to sell stuff. Sometimes they have some very well-developed tools that have helped them and countless customers actually do some financial justification, and a prime target is no value work, right? It's a good place to start.
Great, Nigel, and that's a wonderful segue. JT, Matt, thank you very much for your time. It's been fantastic having you here. A lot of great information. Can't wait till we can be in person again, but until then, we'll do our best to bring all sorts of different ways to get the conversation flowing and bring the sense of community to the membership. Thanks again for your time. Folks, for those who are on, thank you very much. Mark your calendars for the next one. We had a fantastic segue from Nigel there. We've got the next professional series October 14th, and we're going to be talking about conducting a financial analysis. We'll have two more board members, along with myself and Nigel Moulton, having that conversation. Also, can't wait. Wish we were in person, but we're not. But we're going to bring you some incredible stuff next week. Next week is VMworld, so mark your calendars for that. But more importantly, mark your calendars for October 6th from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern Time for the Converged User Group VR Lounge. Wonderful, wonderful program we're bringing you. We've got one of our board members, Adam Little from New Belgium Brewing, brought one of his friends on for their Top Golf VX Rail story. We are going to do this in VR. We are going to live stream to Zoom for those who don't have headsets and can't get into VR. And we've got the typical updates from Dell Technologies and VMworld, as well as really fun opportunities to educate and perhaps sample a little bit of New Belgium's beers. So mark your calendars for that. And then on Thursday, we have noon Eastern to 1 Eastern. We're going to go deep into VxRail plus NVIDIA AI ML. What can they bring? I'm not going to tease too much of it because you're going to hear a lot about it next week. But to learn more, if you're interested in AI ML deployments, if you're interested in what NVIDIA plus VxRail can bring to you, tune into that. Noon Eastern to 1 p.m. on Thursday, October 7th. All VMworld related, all fantastic, all in VR and live streamed. Let's see, links to register are located on the right-hand side under resources. Thank you, Anne, that's fantastic. We do appreciate if you could tell us how we did. We have a SurveyMonkey link in the events. Gentlemen, I will give it one last, anything that I missed, anything that you want to say? Silence is fantastic. That works too. Thank you all for attending. Looking forward to seeing you next week in VR and looking forward to seeing you in person as soon as possible. Be safe and thank you very much. Cheers all.
Thank you.